What's going on, guys? It's the Draft Nerd, and with the NFL season being totally wrapped up, this is post Super Bowl. I thought it'd be fun to take a look back at all the rookies in the first round and kind of grade them. Just go over how they played. Who played good, who played bad, and these grades are definitely subjective. These are my opinions, so don't crucify me too much in the comments. But I'm gonna give each first round pick a grade, A through F. And without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so coming in at number 1, we got the number 1 overall pick, Bryce Young. And I give him a C-. Now, a lot of people would probably give him closer to an F or a D+. But you got to think that winning isn't a quarterback stat. This is a team sport. I know a lot of people like to say, if a team's losing, it's all the quarterback's fault. And that's just not the case. Bryce Young had to deal with, bad offensive weapons, bad offensive line. His defense wasn't anything spectacular. I guess people expected him to carry the team on his back. And I'm not going to lie, another guy who's coming up next in TJSToud kind of did put the team on his back, but that's kind of like a one-of-one case. That's not going to happen all the time. So you got to just think, Bryce Young has all the talent in the world. And even flashed that in his rookie season. He flashed it many times with good throws, good anticipation. Being able to escape the pocket when needed. Like he showed that he belongs in the NFL, and he maybe not deserved to be the number 1 overall pick, because I do think TJSToud has shown that he deserved it, but I just don't want to write it off for Bryce Young yet. I give him a C-. He wasn't the best, but he also wasn't the worst, and people need to realize that. Moving on to the 2nd overall pick, we got the Houston Texans, TJSToud, and I gave him an A+. I don't really think you can argue an A+. He had one of the best rookie seasons I've ever seen. Over 4,000 passing yards, 23 touchdowns, only 5 interceptions. He took his team to the playoffs. He took his team from, I don't know the record offhand, but he took his team from being one of the worst teams in the NFL to a playoff contender. I'm not going to say they were no Super Bowl contender, but their future is super bright with TJSToud at the helm. And I think if there was a redraft today, I think TJSToud goes number 1, no doubt. And that's one of the reasons he won Offensive Rookie of the Year. Up next, we got Will Anderson, and a lot of people are going to want to give him an A+, since he did win Defensive Rookie of the Year. But I'm going to be very strict on who I give A+ to. Spoiler alert, TJSToud might be my only A+. But, you're going to have to watch the video to find out. So Will Anderson did get an A from me. He did win DPOY, but there's not really much you can complain about with Will Anderson. He had 7 sacks as a rookie, which is very solid. 59 total pressures. He showed that he's able to get to the quarterback, and he showed that he could do what he did at Alabama in the NFL. I think the sky's the limit for Will Anderson, and I think in the next 5 years we could be talking about him being the best edge rusher in the league, kind of like we talk about guys like Myles Garrett, Micah Parsons, guys like that. I think Will Anderson is going to be in that discussion in about 3 to 5 years. Moving on to the 4th pick, we had the Colts taking Anthony Richardson, and Richardson was the 3rd quarterback off the board, and I think that's probably right. I think in a redraft I would still have Anthony Richardson as the 3rd quarterback off the board, but that's not to say he didn't have a good season when he played. I gave him a B+, and the only reason he didn't reach that A criteria was, 1, he was injured a lot this season. He had the season-ending injury, in week 7 maybe. I'm not 100% sure. But even before that, he seemed to be getting, banged up almost every game. So you like to see that kind of subside a bit. And obviously, coming out of college, he wasn't known as, a marksman. He wasn't going to throw every ball extremely accurately. And that did show up in the NFL. He was missing easy throws here and there, but he made up with that with his athleticism and his tools. So you still want to see him get a little bit more refined as the years go on. But as of now, after his rookie season, I gave him a B+, and I think that's what he deserves. Moving on to number 5, we got the Seahawks taking Deon Witherspoon. And he was in contention for Defensive Rookie of the Year, and I think he maybe should have won it. He had just an all-around great season. He stayed healthy, which some of these rookies had a hard time doing. He had 3 sacks as a cornerback. He only had 1 interception, but he seemed to be locked down all season. And coming out of college, he was known as one of the better tackling cornerbacks we've ever seen coming out of college. And he put that on display in the NFL. You can't really say much about him. He was great in run defense. He was great in coverage. So, I mean, not much you can say, and that's why, I mean, I gave him an A. Like I said, A-pluses are hard to come by, but you can't really come up with any negatives with Deon Witherspoon's rookie season. So, I think he's very deserving of an A. Moving on to number 6, we have the Cardinals taking Paris Johnson Jr., and this was the first tackle off the board, and I gave him a C- just because he wasn't, the most polished tackle in his rookie season. He started most games at right tackle, and I mean, he allowed a good amount of pressures. He allowed 42 pressures. He allowed 8 sacks. So, I mean, was he the best in pass protection? Probably not, but with rookie offensive tackles, you got to kind of wait a year or two before they really, blossom into some of the top tackles in the NFL. So, just because I'm saying Paris Johnson didn't have a great rookie season doesn't mean I don't think he's going to be, an upper echelon of right or left tackles in the league one day. But basing it off of just his rookie season, I think he deserves a C-. There was some good in this game, but there was also a good amount of bad that you've seen in this game as well. So I ended up with a C- for him, and I think that's pretty fair. Moving on to the 7th pick, we had the Raiders taking Tyreek Wilson. And, I mean, I didn't hold it back. I gave him a D. And, I mean, in hindsight, you could see that you could have got, if you wanted to stick with edge rusher, you could have got a Lucas Van Ness who played better. I mean, you could have reached down the board and maybe a Miles Murphy even played better. Like, there was a lot of edge rushers that played better than Tyreek Wilson. I mean, Tyreek Wilson struggled to even stay on the field and get playing time. I mean, he had about 450 total snaps, and a lot of them were pass rush snaps. But, I mean, he finished his campaign with 4 sacks, 24 total pressures. But, I mean, in hindsight, you could have got Will Levis. I mean, 1 year later, Raiders are looking for a quarterback. You could have had your quarterback in Will Levis, but they decided to pass on him and get a guy who I was never really high on in Tyreek Wilson. And, I mean, again, it's just a rookie season. I don't want to overreact too much by these grades, but basing off of his rookie season, I think he deserves a D. And, I mean, he's got all the potential in the world. He was a raw prospect coming out, so you got to try to take that into account as well. But overall, I just came out with a D grade for him, and I think there's room to improve for sure if he gets more playing time, but I don't know, just not the best rookie season in my opinion. All right, coming in at number 8, we have the Atlanta Falcons taking Bijan Robinson, and I ended up giving this a B, very close to a B+, but I ended with a B, just because I think there was another running back drafted in the first round that had a bit of a better season and was drafted a little bit later. But for Bijan Robinson, a lot of his struggles mainly came from coaching. I mean, Arthur Smith really didn't do Bijan any favors. But Bijan ended with 969 yards, so he was almost a 1,000-yard rusher. He had 30 explosive runs, so he showed off that he was a very explosive running back, and he also showed his ability in the receiving game as well with nearly 500 receiving yards on almost 60 receptions. And he also had 4 receiving touchdowns. So I'd be lying if I said I didn't see Bijan's potential and, some of that shine through his rookie season. But I don't know, his quote-unquote struggles, because he did have 4 fumbles as well, but his quote-unquote struggles mixed with how high he was drafted, I mean, I don't know. I couldn't get into that A range, and I ended up with a B, close to a B+, though. And with the 9th overall pick, the Eagles took Jaylen Carter, and this was a massive steal. I mean, really the only reason Jaylen Carter fell this much was because of the legal issues with, the whole car racing and the death of the teammates and stuff like that. But, I mean, based off of his rookie season, I mean, you can't deny that this is an easy A pick. Close to an A+. I'm going to admit, this was very close to one of my A+ picks, but I ended up going with an A. And, I mean, he had 7 sacks with almost 50 pressures. I mean, and he wasn't even a full-time player. He was more of a rotational player just because the Eagles have so many guys on that defensive line. So hopefully next year he gets a full-time role with this defense. And if that does happen, I mean, I think he'll be in contention for at least an all-pro selection. Like, this guy is very elite for a rookie, and I don't think you can argue an A pick, I don't think you can argue anything less than an A. I think he had one of the better rookie seasons of any of the first-round picks. With the 10th overall pick, we did have the Bears taking Darnell Fry, and I wasn't a huge fan of this pick when the draft initially happened, but I've kind of grown to it. He played a majority of the snaps at right tackle, and I mean, he was known as one of the better right tackles in this class. I just didn't think he was worth a 10th overall pick, but he kind of proved me wrong. I mean, I think he was on par with any of the other tackles in this first round. I think you could argue that he had the best rookie season out of the tackles. So I did end up giving him a C+. You know, he definitely had his struggles. He didn't allow over 50 pressures. He allowed 7 sacks. So, you know, pass blocking wise, he has a lot to work on. But he did show that he was a average to above average run blocker for a rookie. So that's one thing to kind of hang his hat on. So overall, I give him a C+, and I think he's going to improve almost every year. Moving on to the 11th pick, we got the Titans taking Peter Skoronsky, and you know, coming out of college, it was a question on whether he'd be a tackle or a guard, and I think the Titans drafted him to be a guard. I mean, he played 862 snaps at left guard. He didn't play any snaps at tackle, so I think that solidifies that he will be a guard moving forward with tackle flexibility. But he had a really solid rookie season. I mean, he did allow a good amount of sacks for a guard position at 5. He had 32 pressures allowed. So, I mean, you know, just like I said, with all offensive line players, you got to have about a year or two under your belt before you really start becoming a top-end offensive lineman. But I do think he was a bit better in pass protection than in run blocking, just because he is a bit on the smaller side at 6'4", 313 pounds. But, I mean, overall, I think he had a really solid season. I ended up giving him a B-, which is one of the higher grades I gave for any offensive lineman, just because, again, a lot of offensive linemen have up and down rookie seasons, but it seemed to me that Peter Skoronsky kind of had a very mid rookie season, which, you know, I know a lot of people use mid as a bad term, but, I mean, he just had a mid season, an average season, which, you know, isn't always a bad thing for an offensive lineman. Moving on to the 12th pick, we had the Lions surprisingly taking Jibreel Gibbs. I mean, I think everyone kind of had this as one of the worst picks of the first round come draft day. But after his rookie season, he really proved that he did deserve to be taken around the selection. I mean, I think he had one of the better rookie seasons as a running back. And he finished with 945 yards, 316 receiving yards, and a total of 11 touchdowns. And that was all while having a split backfield with David Montgomery. So, I mean, I think if he had a full season as the full-time running back, he would have had one of the better seasons in general for a running back, not even as a rookie. So I think the Lions were really justified in picking Jibreel Gibbs at 12. And I ended up giving Jibreel Gibbs a B+. And I just have a really hard time giving any running back an A or, you know, an A+ grade, just because you can find running backs who can give you a lot of value in the later rounds, you know, late day 2, early day 3 range. So it's going to be hard for me to give a running back an A grade in general in the first round, but I think Jibreel Gibbs is the closest thing to that for me. Moving on, we had Lucas Van Ness with the 13th pick to the Packers, and, you know, we kind of seen this pick coming from a mile away. Lucas Van Ness just seemed like a Packer, you know, all throughout the, you know, March, April kind of process, and I mean, he played solid. Again, he was more of a rotational edge rusher for him, but he ended the season with 5 sacks, you know, 18 pressures, and he really was great in run defense. His pass rush, you know, technique needs to get a little bit better, and I think it will with time. But overall, I think he had a really solid rookie season. I ended up giving him a B- just because he didn't play as much as you would like him to, but when he was on the field, he was pretty effective. Moving on to the 14th pick, we had the Steelers taking Brodrick Jones, the tackle out of Georgia. And I think Brodrick Jones had one of the better rookie seasons at the tackle position in this class. He kind of split a little bit of time at right tackle and left tackle. He mainly played right tackle with around 600 snaps, but he also played about 100 of left tackle snaps. And so he kind of showed his flexibility to play either side. But I mean, I think he had one of the better rookie seasons. He did allow 29 pressures, but he only allowed 4 sacks. So I mean, his pass blocking was solid, and he also showed good run block technique. So, I mean, I think Brodrick Jones is close to having one of the best offensive tackle grades. I ended up giving him a C+, but I was very close to giving him a B-, but I don't think there is any good tackle rookie seasons in the first round. I mean, Paris Johnson, Brodrick Jones, Anton Harrison we'll get to, like Darnell Fry, like all of these guys had solid rookie seasons, not good, but not bad, you know, just, again, mid. So with the 15th overall pick, we had the Jets taking Will McDonald, and if you remember correctly, The Jets were almost guaranteed to take Brodrick Jones with this pick, but the Steelers did trade up and snipe him from him, so they were kind of forced into like plan B, and they did take Will McDonald, and I mean, I think this might have been a blessing in disguise for him. I mean, he didn't play many snaps at all his rookie season. He only played about 200 snaps, but in those 200 snaps, he had 4 sacks, 12 pressures, 8 total tackles. Like, he played very solid when he got on the field. Again, the Jets defense is just really stacked, and he didn't really find his way into the rotation, but with all those kind of bright spots you've seen with Will McDonald, I ended up giving him a B grade just because, again, he didn't get on the field much, but when he did, he definitely flashed his potential. Now moving on to the 16th pick, we do got the Commanders taking Emanuel Forbes, and I hated this pick on draft day. I think a lot of people did. If you remember correctly, Christian Gonzalez was known as, for some people, the top cornerback. Him and Deon Witherspoon were known as the top 2 cornerbacks almost, consensusly. But the Commanders decided to take Emanuel Forbes over Christian Gonzalez, and it did not work out great for him. He started the season as a starter, and you quickly seen that his weight was definitely a concern. I mean, at 6'1", 180 pounds at an outside corner position, you're going to end up getting bullied and kind of thrown around a bit. And, I mean, you've seen that a lot. And he ended up getting benched about halfway through the season. He did have 1 interception, which is good, but there's just not much to say that was good about Emanuel Forbes. Now, like I said, this is only his rookie season, so he does have room to grow. All of these players are young, but if we're basing just off of what we've seen in his rookie season, I think I got to hand out my first F grade. And, I might be a little bit harsh with this F grade, but you got to really take into account that they passed on Christian Gonzalez, who had an amazing rookie season, which we'll get to next, but they passed on Christian Gonzalez to take Emanuel Forbes. So they took that risk, and it just hasn't paid off for him so far. But again, there's still a lot of years to be played. So, I don't think it's the end of the world for the Commanders or Emanuel Forbes. Just not the best rookie season for him. And like I was saying earlier, Christian Gonzalez was taken with a 17th overall pick. And Christian Gonzalez was on pace with Deon Witherspoon for the best rookie cornerback season. The only thing that stopped Christian Gonzalez was injury. He only ended up playing about 200 snaps total, but in those 200 snaps, he showed that he was maybe even a better cornerback than Deon Witherspoon, at least based on what we've seen. I mean, according to PFF, he had an 80 grade overall, which is insane for a rookie, especially at the cornerback position. So I think Christian Gonzalez has all the potential in the world. I don't see how the Commanders passed on him, or I don't see how a lot of teams passed on him. I think Christian Gonzalez was a top 10 player, last year during the draft, and I think he's a top 10 player now. So for the Patriots to get him at 17, that's an absolute steal, and that's why I ended up giving him an A. Up next, we got the Lions taking Jack Campbell with the 18th pick, their second pick in the first round. And again, this pick was heavily criticized when it first happened. I wasn't a big fan of it. I thought there was no real linebacker worthy of a first round pick, and especially not Jack Campbell, but he ended up getting picked with the 18th overall pick, and he had an up and down season. I mean, he wasn't the full-time guy at the linebacker position. He played about 500 snaps, and he really showed that he was a really good run defender, but we kind of already knew that coming out. The things we had questions on was his pass coverage ability, and he struggled with that his rookie season. According to PFF, he had a 124.2 passer rating allowed, which, isn't the best, but he did have 58 tackles, 25 stops, 2 sacks, and so he had a really good rookie season when it came to run defense and a pretty poor season when it came to pass coverage. So overall, I gave him a C. Again, just a mid-season, really good run defender, not so great pass coverage guy. So I don't know. I ended up giving him a C, but I think this is one of the picks that, some people would give him a B, some people would give him a D. I don't know. I think this pick could be all over the place, but I ended up just giving him a C grade. And with the 19th pick, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers did take Keke Coutee, the undersized defensive tackle out of Pittsburgh. And I ended up giving him a B just because he did what they drafted him to do, which was be a penetrating 3-tech. He ended the season with 4 sacks and 34 pressures, and he primarily played on pass rush snaps in general. He had almost 400 pass rush snaps compared to only 200 run defense snaps. Now, when it came to when he was on the field for run defense, I mean, according to PFF, he had a 29.8 grade, which is terrible. And you kind of knew that with him. He is only a 280-pound 3-tech. But when you're looking at what they drafted him to do, which was get to the passer, he did that at a pretty high level. So that's why I ended up giving him a B. You know, if you played a little bit better in run defense, he could have gotten that into the A range. But he was just so bad in run defense that you had to kind of knock him for it. And I ended up just giving him a B for his entire rookie season. Now, coming in at 20, we had Jackson Smith and Njigba, and this is where we had that run on the wide receiver position with 4 straight wide receivers. So it's a little bit easier to grade these in hindsight just because we know where they got picked back to back to back. So I ended up giving JSN a B-, and that was mainly because he was behind 2 other receivers in DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. But even with that being said, he did have 90 targets with 63 receptions and 628 yards, 4 touchdowns. You know, he had a solid rookie season, which is why I gave him a B-, but at no point in his rookie season was he a number one, option for the Seahawks. Next year I think he will overtake Tyler Lockett and be that second option for whoever the quarterback is for the Seahawks, probably Geno Smith. But I don't see him ever being a number one receiver, especially if he's, going to be playing with DK Metcalf his whole career. So that's something I took into account, but he was really solid. He started off a bit slow and kind of picked it up towards the end of his rookie season, but overall, I just ended up giving him a B-. Moving on next, we had Quinn Johnson, and man, where do I begin with Quinn Johnson? I mean, I ended up giving him an F just because, for one, he was already slotted in to be playing behind Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, and he was slotted in to be that third receiver, to be that deep threat, and he just couldn't get it on the field. Even when Mike Williams went down with injury, Josh Palmer stepped up and was playing over him. It seemed like Quinn Johnson just could never seem to get on the field, and when he did, he wasn't even targeted much. He ended his season with 38 receptions for 431 yards and 2 touchdowns, which is solid, but you got to think a lot of that was due to injury. So I don't know. Maybe next year, there's a possibility that Keenan Allen, Mike Williams aren't on the team anymore, and he kind of has to step up into that bigger role, and he might have a better season then. But when you look at all the other receivers drafted in the first round, the seasons they had, you got to kind of give him an F for it. I mean, he didn't stand out with the rest of them. The questions that were coming out in college, was he able to play physical at the catch point? He showed that he wasn't able to in the NFL, so I don't know. I gave him an F, maybe a little harsh, but I don't know. Some people got to get Fs. Moving on next, we got Zay Flowers, and Zay Flowers had a very good rookie season. He had 77 receptions for 858 yards, 5 touchdowns, and he also had a rushing touchdown as well. And he kind of became Lamar Jackson's favorite wide receiver target. They still had Mark Andrews to throw the ball to, but at the receiver position, he was the Ravens' number one receiver over guys like Odell Beckham and Rashad Bateman. And I mean, he might only be a slot player in the NFL, but he's going to be a damn good one, that's for sure. So I ended up giving him a B+, very close to that A range, but I don't think he had the best receiver rookie season. I think that goes to Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison had 911 receiving yards, 10 touchdowns. He was really the number one option when Justin Jefferson missed all that time this season. And I mean, he stepped up in a big way. I mean, he was a touchdown machine. He had 10 touchdowns, the most out of any rookie receiver, by far, really. I mean, he had double what any other first-round receiver had. I think Jordan Addison might be the only number one receiver caliber player in the first round. Just because Zay Flowers is a slot guy, slot guys usually aren't the number one options on a team. Same with JSN, and then Quinn Johnson, I don't see him ever being a number one option. So that's why I ended up giving Jordan Addison an A grade just because of that. And, I mean, he was able to put the ball in the end zone, which is what receivers need to do. Moving on, we did have my Giants taking Deontay Banks with their first-round selection. And, man, he had such a weird season, a very up-and-down season. He was known as that physical man corner coming out of college. And that seemed to fit perfectly with Wink Martindale's system. And, I mean, he played good, but he also got burned a lot with the more elite, quick, shiftier receivers. And I kind of knew that coming out that he was going to have a pretty rough rookie season. I ended up giving him a C just because he did show promise and potential. I mean, he had 2 interceptions, but man, he just got toasted on some of those routes that quicker receivers were able to run. And so I ended up giving him a C. I think he's got all the potential in the world, but based off his rookie season, I think it was very up and down. Up next, we have the Bills' first-round pick, and they took Dalton Keke, the first tight end, off the board. And during the draft, I thought it was a bit questionable. I was a big Michael Mayer guy, but Dalton Keke had a really good rookie season. I ended up giving him a B just because he wasn't the number one option on the Bills, obviously. He wasn't number two. He was more of that third option behind Gabe Davis, Stephon Diggs. But he ended the season with 673 yards, 2 touchdowns. And, I mean, he was a primary player for a playoff and even a Super Bowl contending team. So, you got to give him credit for that. I think a B might be a little harsh, maybe more of that B+ range. But when you really think about it, they could have had Sam Laporta, who was drafted in the second round by the Lions, and he had a way better season than Dalton Keke did, in my opinion. Up next, we got the Cowboys taking Mazi Smith, and Mazi Smith had a interesting rookie season. I mean, he wasn't on the field too much. He only had about 300 snaps total. He was pretty solid when it came to pass rushing, but his run defense was very, very sloppy. I think he got moved pretty easily by offensive linemen. And we kind of knew that coming out. He was a very unpolished guy, more of an athletic freak. And I think he was able to put his freakish abilities on display when it came to pass rush, just not so much run defense. So I think he'll clean it up later in his career. But based off his rookie season, I think that he deserves that C- grade just because, he did have a sack and 8 pressures on the very limited snaps, but he just wasn't able to see the field as much. So you can't give him, much of a higher grade than a C-. Moving on, we had the Jaguars taking Anton Harrison, and I was never a fan of Anton Harrison coming out. I didn't think he played, very strong, and that was kind of put on display. I mean, he did start for the Jaguars at right tackle, and he only allowed 27 pressures, only 5 sacks. So when it came to pass blocking, I thought he was very solid, but he just didn't show it that strength in the run game, and I think that hurt him a lot. And so that's why I ended up giving him a D+, just because I like to see him just get a little bit stronger. D+ might be a little harsh. I think a lot of people would give him more of a C+, but I don't know. Maybe it's a little biased, but I just was never a fan of Anton Harrison. Up next, we got Myles Murphy. And, I mean, again, these later end round guys, they didn't see the most time in the world. Myles Murphy, about 300 snaps. And he had 15 pressures, 3 sacks. When it came to rushing the quarterback, he was pretty solid. But again, just like a lot of these guys, his run defense was, a little less good. I mean, Myles Murphy had a 46.8 run defense grade according to PFF, so not the best. But I think Myles Murphy has a lot of potential. I mean, again, these rookie edge rushers, they just need time to develop. But overall, I gave Myles Murphy a C-, just a middle-of-the-road grade for a middle-of-the-road rookie season. Up next, we had Bryan Bresee, and he wasn't really talked about much for how, solid of a rookie season he had, at least rushing the quarterback. I mean, he had 31 pressures with 5 sacks for being a defensive tackle. That's pretty good. Again, just like I said with a lot of these guys, his run defense was just piss poor. It was terrible. According to PFF, it was a 30.1 grade, and I think that shows with his kind of snaps. 386 pass rush snaps to only 148 run defense snaps. So I think the Saints knew that. I just think he needs to get a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger. His 6'5", 305-pound frame is a little on the slimmer side. So I think that, with more years and more off seasons to, add some muscle, I think that run defense grade is going to go up. But he had a really solid pass rushing season, so that's why I ended up giving him the B grade, even though I think most people might give him more of that C- grade. Moving on, we got the Eagles taking Nolan Smith, and at the time of the draft, this was a big steal. No one really thought that Nolan Smith was going to slide to the Eagles here, and the Eagles ended up taking him at 31, or I guess 30. But, he was definitely more of a pass or a rotational guy. He only had about 150 total snaps, so again, there was just so many guys on the Eagles defensive line that it was hard for him to get snaps. But when he did get snaps, I mean, he played solid. I mean, only 1 sack, 8 pressures, but I mean, I just really liked how he played when I did see him in the game. He just was never really in the game, so you can't really give him, a great grade. But taking into account that he fell this far and that when he was on the field, he played good. I did give him a B-. You know, I think if he played like all these other rookies, I think it could have been a B+ to an A range, but he just didn't play too much, so I can't give him much more than a B-. And then moving on to the last pick of the first round, we got Felix Uzama, and you know, again, he wasn't on the field that much. You know, he had about 200 snaps, mainly during pass rushing downs, and he tallied 11 pressures. You know, he had a sack. You know, nothing too special, a very underwhelming season, but I didn't expect too much from the guy in year one. But if we're basing it just off of year one, I did give him a C-. Again, just a very underwhelming season, but he didn't do anything terrible to, you know, deserve anything lower than a C-, but he didn't do anything good per se to get him above that C- grade. So I ended up giving him a C-. I think that's pretty fair. And then that's going to do it. You know, a lot of these rookies had really good seasons. Some had really bad seasons. So these grades are definitely subjective. You know, these are just my opinions. But let me know if you guys agreed with any of my grades. Let me know on the ones that you disagreed, because I know there's going to be a ton of conversations in the comments about, you know, what I did wrong, what I did right. So let me know in the comments. And if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing. And as always, this is the Draft Nerd, and thanks for watching.